everyone, and welcome to our next conversation. I have the pleasure to be joined by our Director of Research and Education at the Digital Wellness Institute, Dr. Sophie Janicke-Bowles. Sophie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm so excited to dive into this research. I know this is near and dear to my heart, as I know it is yours. So let's just take a step back to really ground ourselves in what we're talking about. First, digital wellness, right? Digital well-being. Sophie, you started really leading the academic research in terms of creating a validated scale to measure digital wellness and what you term digital flourishing. Before we even dive into any of this on the workplace side, can you just give us a background as to what the digital flourishing model is and its importance?
Yeah, absolutely. In my research, I look at the way that technology and general media is impacting us in positive ways and affecting our well-being in general. And so, one of the things that I noticed is that when we look at the effects of technology on us, there's a lot of scales that measure all the negative outcomes. When it comes to right FOMO or problematic social media use or problematic phone use or things of that nature. And I realized that we're missing actually something big here, which is also the ways in which we flourish with our technologies. And so I went off to see if there's any measures to assess that, and there weren't as of yet. And so I got a team of researchers together to build out this digital flourishing scale, which now has also been applied to adolescents and is really getting a lot of recognition around the world because people realize that we need to really assess also how young and all aged individuals that obviously all use technology are using it well. And so it includes things all related to communication, really. And so these are things like how people feel like they can feel connected when they communicate in a digital space, or they feel like they present themselves. Also, the of course important component of self-control is part of that scale as well. And so it gives us just a really good background to see what are the things that people actually do well, and then with their technology, how they communicate with their technology, and then we can leverage that to potentially solve some of the issues, of course, that we see as well.
I love that, and I love the notion of flourishing, and again the application of positive psychology, and that because as we found, right, that's so much more motivating than when thinking about the negative. And I think we've done an excellent job and an intentional job of applying that in our workplace wellness solutions. So for those joining for the first time and kind of listening and learning a little bit more about what digital wellness is and how it applies to workplace wellness, what we do is we help organizations really understand the impact that screen-mediated technology has on the employee experience. We focus both on employee wellness as well as their productivity, and we apply this research-based, data-driven approach to helping organizations build positive, keyword positive, digital practices into their organizations to make a lasting impact. One of the things that we have begun to do is take this notion of digital flourishing, which is really our wheel for individuals, right? It's a model and an approach and a scale to measure individual flourishing. And we've transitioned a part of that scale or applied a part of that scale to this new model, which is called the digital balance model for workplace wellness. And it's all grounded in your initial work there, Sophie. And as you can see, for those who are watching live, there are 5 domains on the outside of this wheel that actually map back to a few of those that you studied, right, and that you created in the flourishing scale. Those being mental health, relationships, communication, physical health, and digital citizenship. But from there, we decided, well, we need a broader category, or we need categories that people can really understand and relate to. And so what we did is we created then 3 core pillars of organizational digital balance. Those being digital balance, digital inclusion and belonging, and digital boundaries. So the 3 B's of workplace wellness. One of the things I often like to say, Sophie, is when I'm talking to partners or prospective partners who are interested in applying this in their workplace, I often ask them, okay, to what extent do your existing strategies account for employee mental health or employee physical health? And 99.9% of the time they say, yes, we absolutely do that. And I said, that's amazing. That's so cool. That's great. To what extent does that apply or relate or map back to the role of screen time in the employee experience? And that's where I kind of get some blank stares and some very inquisitive looks. And oftentimes there's crickets, right? Because the reality is the majority of the way that organizations are thinking about employee wellness, they don't account for the elevated rates of screen time on the employee experience. Can you speak just a little bit to why you think that's important for organizations to measure and even researchers to measure moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. There is obviously a lot of research that looks at the amount of time we spend on our technologies. And in the workplace, what we see is that a lot of times our notion of more is not true, in the sense that the more we spend time on our screens and the more we try to crunch numbers and basically, right, try to do our job, the less actually we get out of it. That's a reality. We think that, oh, if I just stick with it and I just continue to work really hard and quickly, then I'll get more out. But that's obviously not how it works. We actually see, even just if we look at obviously time spent working, that after way less hours that we actually work, our productivity goes down. But when it comes to screens, there's a lot of other things that happen. One, of course, is eyesight. Actually, our eyes are not made to look at screens 24/7, yet we do it anyways. And that leads to fatigue in the eyes. It can lead to headaches, neck, shoulder issues from not only eyesight, but also just obviously sitting in front of a computer. The other thing, of course, that comes, that's less of the physical health domain here, but also is related to productivity, is the distractions that come from constantly being on our screens. That also we feel like make us maybe more productive because we can see what a colleague wants and we reply, but it just takes away from actually the focused work that we need to do to move projects along. And that also then again ties back into us feeling way more stressed. So that's again tapping into mental health and the whole issue of burnout. And so these are just some things that come up at the workplace, but there's a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned all of those from an individual perspective, right? But then if we think about not only the micro, but the macro trends and what we're seeing from an organization's bottom line, right? When you have a culture of employees who are burnt out, overwhelmed, distracted, right? That certainly impacts the bottom line. And so what this model really does is it helps to reorient the traditional pillars of employee wellness and employee assistance around the impact of screen mediated technologies. And so we are seeing that the most progressive organizations that are really thinking new trends, like industry leaders, how to lead this new wave of employee well-being in remote, hybrid, virtual spaces, are really using this model to address that. And Sophie, I want to ask, why does it matter? I know you did a study about 2 months ago on this specific survey and this specific model. And if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about the model itself, how it was created, the academic rigor that was applied to it, and if you have offhand like any ideas as to what the impacts were, correlations were on those big topic items that I know organizations are thinking about: burnout, job stress, turnover, depression, and anxiety. Could you share that with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question. To me, as a researcher, this is really dear to my heart, that whatever measures we put out in the world are actually measuring what we intend to measure. They're reliable, they're valid, and so it was, my duty as a researcher to provide that to the institute. And so basically, what we did is, as I did with my individual flourishing scale, collect a big pool of items. We ended up with 66 questions, right? We call those items, to get at the heart of basically culture, workplace culture, in relation to technology use. And so again, away from the individual perceptions of, do I feel FOMO when I'm not on my phone, to really a culture aspect of how is my organization supporting me to take breaks from a screen, for example. And we gathered a variety of these questions from the literature, from obviously our pool of experts that have talked to organizations for quite some time now and get a lot of insights and qualitative data that also fed into these questions. And then we had our list of questions and did a study with 120 American adults that basically just went through those questions. And we made sure also beforehand that these questions are, readable to a variety of, are really easy to understand and readable. They also are related to the outcomes of the companies, because that's obviously what companies are also interested in. And again, focus on the culture of the company, as I already said. So then we had 120 people that went through our survey, and afterwards we did a statistical procedure that is just standard in the field, where we basically try to dwindle down the questions based on how well they're actually measuring what we intend to measure. So here, digital balance. We see kind of, okay, where do they land those questions? Do they measure aspects of mental health, physical health, like aspects that we've seen obviously are important in this field? And we found that all these questions basically gathered on these now 3 pillars that we have, which are screen balance, digital boundaries, and digital inclusion and belonging. And because, of course, we didn't want to overburden people with that many questions, we selected the 10 or overall 10 highest loading questions on these 3 factors, which made up now our core digital balance survey questionnaire. But the then important part to Tyler's your question in terms of how it relates also, right, why it matters and how it relates to the bottom line. Again, in order to make sure that this scale that we're trying to create is actually measuring what we intend to measure, we need to correlate it with these business outcomes and outcomes that we think we theoretically should be related to digital balance. And so, right, what should be related to digital balance? Certainly, if a person, for example, has Zoom fatigue, then this should be related to less digital balance, right? If a person has high job stress, that should be related to less digital balance. So we basically went through a bunch of these correlates and indeed found that significantly, significantly just also means that it's basically relevantly related the digital balance scale to these outcomes of Zoom fatigue, job stress, NPS, and then our main pillars also, or outcomes that we're also really concerned about, which is burnout, turnover, depression, and we also actually looked at things, of course, the positive end as well, such as workplace well-being, and even individual and team resilience. So here the idea being that if my digital balance is high, that should also make me feel like my workplace, right? I feel really well at my workplace. And so we found all these correlates, which is why now we are ended up, being able to kind of show that digital balance is strongly related to actually aspects of burnout, of turnover, of depression and anxiety. So really those things that Tyler mentioned at the beginning, these are the things that are the issues that companies deal with. They can actually be addressed with digital balance.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sophie. And, I often talk about the idea of the missing metric. And what that means is that, again, for those organizations, for those organizational leaders that are caring so much about burnout and they're trying to address it, they care a lot about raising their EMPS scores and mitigating rates of depression or the costs of depression within their workplace, especially for those who are self-insured. The idea of the missing metric is the notion that if we're not tracking digital balance, we're actually missing a significant piece of the pie, right? And thus, if we are charged as leaders with addressing burnout within our organization, correct me if I'm wrong, Sophie, but the research that you've found, it showed that essentially 22% of an organization's burnout can be attributed to a lack of digital balance. Can you walk us through that and walk us through the other findings as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is coming from real data of people taking the 10-item digital balance scale, and then also assess their burnout as well as their depression scores in the last 2 weeks. And so by correlating, or in this sense, conducting a regression analysis, we can basically show how one variable is related to the other and how much percentage of variance can be explained by digital balance of these parameters of burnout, depression, and also ENPS here. And so, yes, we see that if a company is basically not investing, or their lack of investing in digital balance can really significantly impact the burnout of their employees. And so here, these 22% really show that if you invest in even other things related to burnout, so let's say you give your employees a gym, right, so they can do yoga, just kind of stuff like that, we've seen obviously is helpful. There is still this percentage here that we have missed, which is actually checking in how they're doing with their screens. And that can reduce, again, significantly the burnout scores, and as well as we can see here, depression scores, and increase ENPS, which is a big factor to predict turnover intentions. And so we want to obviously decrease turnover as much as we can, because it is so costly for organizations.
And this is the most important part. This is the part that I'm so passionate about, and just want to share with anybody and everybody that will listen. The fact that, employer benefits and employee benefits, the market right now it's very saturated. A lot of large companies that we work with, they often ask, well, hey, we already offer all of these employee benefits, and utilization of those benefits are relatively low. I think on one aspect, employees feel like they don't even know what benefits they're offered because there are so many, right? But exactly to your point, Sophie, while we're not saying that those benefits, the existence of those, are a negative by any means, we're saying that, frankly, if they don't address the underlying culture of the organization's digital balance, we're missing a significant portion of the problem. And what we really need is we need to, A, identify and pinpoint that problem using data and analysis. And then two, we need to really use that to influence our strategy, our employee wellness strategy, to really target and have targeted interventions, whether that's trainings, whether that's products, whether that's a culture of permission, a permission culture that grants the ability to have digital balance, digital boundaries, and frankly, a community of digital belonging as well. That's what I think the most successful organizations in the future are going to have. And this model that you've helped to build is what I believe the next forefront of employee wellness and organizational success. So thank you so much for just sharing that with us, and for all the work that you're doing, both in academia and here at the Institute.
Yeah, thank you. Let me know if you have any other questions. I'm always here to provide any answers on the research side as much as I can.